Okay, we're going to go over stereochemistry, hopefully 10 minutes or less. We'll see. I hit on this first slide in lecture the other day. This is part of chapter 14 at the very end. You do need to know stereochemistry and chirality. So definitely on the exam, I'm probably going to ask you if you can identify a chiral molecule or a chiral carbon or something along those lines. So please be prepared to answer that and know that. Stereochemistry. It is the study of molecules that have the same overall connectivity. So that means the atoms are connected the same. So you could draw them out and they can have identical Lewis structures. But because we know carbon-carbon bonds can rotate, carbon single bonds, that means these stereochemistry means that molecules can be different in how the atoms are arranged three-dimensionally. Okay? You could have the same things connected, but then you could twist it up or down or to the side and get a new three-dimensional arrangement, a new conformation, and these are what we call stereoisomers. Okay, they're isomers with the same formulas, same Lewis structure, all the atoms are connected the same, but they are just arranged in space differently. Okay, it's sometimes hard to mentally project this in our mind, to imagine this, but that's a lot of what stereochemistry asks you to do, to visualize how things can be different. And you can get different isomers that way. So conformational isomers. This is some of the language you need to know. What is a conformational isomer? It's a kind of stereoisomer, and it's isomers that can be interconverted, meaning you can make them look like each other by simple carbon bond rotations. Okay, they are stereoisomers that they just have different conformations. So we call them conformational isomers. So if you twist one thing, you can make it look like the other isomer. Cis-trans isomers, these are different. They are stereoisomers, but they cannot be twisted to make each other look the same because you have the carbon-carbon double bond in cis-trans isomers, and you can't twist or rotate around that. So cis-trans isomers are stereoisomers, yes, but they cannot be interconverted to look like one another. So I talked about, are you right-handed or left-handed? Your hands are mirror images of one another, okay? Your hands are chiral. In other words, they cannot be superimposed on one another. And just like your hands, we can do this with molecules. Molecules can be mirror images of one another, cannot be superimposed. And when that happens, we say these are chiral molecules. You cannot overlay them exactly and make them line up. Molecules that can line up exactly if you superimpose them are known as achiral. All right, this is what we covered. Now let's get to some new stuff. So how do you determine if something is chiral or not, if it's a stereoisomer or not? One way that helps you do this is if you understand planes of symmetry. If a molecule or an object has a plane of symmetry, then that molecule is not chiral. It is achiral. Okay? So chairs, for example, have a plane of symmetry right down the middle here. Okay? Both sides of this chair look exactly alike. All right? And it is not chiral for that reason. Okay? Chiral means there's no planes of symmetry. I want to look over here at butane and 2-butanol. Okay, so 2-butanol indicates we're an alcohol here. So here's our alcohol functional group. And butane or butanol indicates we have 4 carbons. 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's 2-butanol because we see that the OH group is branched off of carbon 2. So if we zoom in on carbon 2, we notice something unique here. I'm going to highlight. This is carbon 2. Carbon 2 has, what's attached to carbon 2? Well, it's got a CH3 group attached to carbon 2. It has this little hydrogen attached to carbon 2. It's got an OH group attached to carbon 2, and then it has, we could group these last 2 carbons together and say, oh, there's an ethyl group attached to carbon 2. Now, this is part of the parent chain, but if we look at it from this perspective, carbon 2 has 4 different unique groups attached to it. Down below, this is also 2-butanol with a plane, a mirror in between them. And what we see, because we have 4 different groups attached to that carbon, we call this particular carbon a chiral carbon. And this molecule over, if you have 1 chiral carbon in your molecule, you as a molecule are chiral overall. I'm going to say that again. If you have even just 1 chiral carbon in your molecule, you are a chiral molecule overall. Not every carbon has to be chiral, and we are just considering carbons here, not oxygens, not hydrogens. We're just considering the atom's carbons. So carbon 3 and carbon 4 are not chiral carbons because they have more than one hydrogen bonded to them. But carbon 2 is, so 2-butanol is chiral overall. All right, so we are seeing the tetrahedral form of 2-butanol down below. This is carbon 2, and then you see all the ethanol, hydroxyl, hydrogen, and methyl groups attached. And no matter how you twist this molecule, you cannot make the, if you tried to align, if you scooted this over and tried to line it up perfectly with the molecule, this molecule right here on the left, you could not get the white, red, blue, and yellow spheres to line up perfectly, no matter how you twisted it. Okay, so it's chiral for that reason. Now, when you have two mirror images of a molecule that are chiral, or I should say, when you have two mirror images of a chiral molecule, we have a specific name for these pairs of molecules. These are both 2-butanol, by the way. Okay, this is literally, both of these are this structure right up here. Just kind of the ball and stick model of the Lewis structure or the condensed structure. But these are two forms of 2-butanol, okay? They have different 3D spatial arrangements, so they're stereoisomers. Specifically, these are what we call enantiomers. Okay? Enantiomers are two mirror images that are they're not superimposable. Okay, so enantiomers, these are mirror images that cannot be superimposed, meaning you can't lay one over the top of the other one and get them to line up exactly. That is what an enantiomer is. Mirror images, they're stereoisomers, mirror images that cannot be superimposed. Okay? Now, let's consider butane. Butane looks a whole lot like 2-butanol, except for instead of an OH group right here, we'd have another hydrogen. There's no OH group in here. It's not an alcohol, it's just an alkane. Because of that, we do have two different groups, but then we also have two identical groups. These two hydrogens are identical. And therefore, this molecule is achiral. We have a plane of symmetry. Okay, if we were to draw this out like this, okay, and now imagine that I actually drew out all the hydrogen bonds. We would have a plane of symmetry right down the middle of the molecule. Okay, it doesn't look like it because I drew these CH3, CH2, CH3, but if I drew out all the hydrogen bonds like I did up here, we would have a plane of symmetry down the molecule, and therefore this is achiral. Okay, so you could, here's the two mirror image forms of butane. They have slightly different spatial arrangements for their groups if you imagine them as little ball and stick models right here. But you could twist them to get them to line up. Okay, you could turn them to get them to line up. If you simply took this molecule on the right and then you twisted it 180 degrees, you would get it to line up. It would look exactly like the molecule over here on the left. Okay, so you have to mentally imagine that. Take your hand. You can't see me right now, but I'm twisting this. I have the molecule in my hand, and I'm twisting my hand around 180 degrees, and I can get the blue sphere. Okay, you got to go all the long way around, but I can get the blue sphere to line up here, and then the yellow sphere will stay where it is. And those are superimposable, so they're not enantiomers. Okay, because enantiomers cannot be superimposed. All right. I've already told you this, but a chiral atom that is both tetrahedral and has 4 different groups attached is known as a chiral carbon. So you see 2 requirements here. For a carbon to be chiral, it has to be tetrahedral, not trigonal planar, not linear, and it has to have 4 different groups attached. Okay? So be able to identify chiral carbons for the exam. Enantiomers, by the way, to differentiate enantiomers, you'll see them put these little letters out front, L and D. I don't know why it's L and D. Don't ask me right now. We're not going to get into that. But those are the ways we identify enantiomers. If you see 2 molecules with the same name and it has L and D in front of them, they're just different. They're enantiomers to each other. Okay. Now they do differ in their biological properties, taste, and odors. Okay. So for example, this carvone molecule here, right here is the chiral carbon. We've got 4 different groups attached. It's tetrahedral. It is a chiral carbon. For example, this carbon, this could not be chiral because it's trigonal planar. Okay, it doesn't have 4 different groups attached. Any carbon with a double bond, this one right up here, these carbons would be trigonal planar, could not be chiral carbons. But if it's tetrahedral, 4 different groups, it can be chiral. But you see, L-carbone, one enantiomer, is the flavoring in spearmint. The other one is the flavoring in the spice called caraway. I don't know if you've ever heard of that spice, but it is a real spice. And so they can have different tastes, different biological properties. There's another example here. I'm not going to get into that one, but that's just another example of how enantiomers can be different in their properties. Okay, glyceraldehyde. This is a small molecule you see below. It's an aldehyde is what it is. And it's an intermediate in the metabolism of glucose. Okay, so it'll be part of glycolysis pathway when we get there. I want to know, does glyceraldehyde have any carbons that are chiral? So here's what I encourage you to do. First, knock off any carbons that you know cannot be chiral. If you see any achiral molecules, how do you know if a molecule or a carbon is achiral? Well, if it has a double bond or a triple bond, or if it has 2 identical bonds attached to it. So, for sure, this carbon is achiral. It cannot be chiral because it's trigonal planar. It's not tetrahedral. It has 2 identical bonds to this oxygen. And guess what? This carbon down here is not chiral. It's achiral because it's got 2 identical bonds to hydrogen. But what about the carbon in the middle? What about this carbon right here? It has got an aldehyde group branched up. That's group 1. An aldehyde. It's got a hydrogen off to the left. That's group 2. It's got an alcohol off to the right. That's group 3. And then it has this whole group down here, a carbon with a phosphate and 2 hydrogens. That's a unique group down here, 4. So this has 4 unique groups. It is tetrahedral. So yes, this is a chiral carbon. Okay, again, we're not considering oxygens or phosphorus atoms or anything else. Let's do one more practice problem, and that is it. Which of the following molecules are chiral? Okay, so let's consider A. We got to draw out 3-chloropentane. This is an alkane, so I'm going to draw 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And on carbon 3, I have a chlorine atom. I've got hydrogens on all the rest of my carbons. So when I finish drawing all these out, you can probably already mark off all the carbons that are not chiral. Well, we'll start left to right. This first carbon, this is not chiral because it has 3 identical bonds to hydrogen. Second carbon is not chiral because it has 2 identical bonds to hydrogen. Same thing for these other 2 carbons over here. Now what about the carbon in the middle? The last carbon. Well, it has a unique group up top, so that's a unique group chlorine. It has a hydrogen on the bottom, but then it has this ethyl group off to the right, and guess what? It also has an identical ethyl group off to the left. So these are the same groups. You see how they're the same? So guess what? This carbon's not chiral either. So this is not chiral. This is achiral. Whoops. 2-chloropentane. What about 2-chloropentane? 2-chloropentane should look a whole lot like 3-chloropentane, except for the fact that the chlorine is bonded off of the second carbon, not the third. And again, all the rest are hydrogens. Okay. Again, go ahead and mark off this carbon's not chiral, that carbon's not chiral because they have identical bonds to hydrogen. None of these carbons are chiral. So now we're just considering the second carbon. Is it chiral? Well, let me take away all my X's. So it's got a unique group up top, the chlorine group. It's got a unique group on the bottom, the hydrogen. It's got a methyl group off to the left, so that's a unique group. And it's got a propyl group off to the right, and that's a unique group. So yes, this is chiral. It's a chiral molecule. It's got 1 chiral carbon. And remember, Not all the carbons have to be chiral. If you have one chiral carbon, you are a chiral molecule. You're in the group. Okay, what about C? I'm not actually going to draw the Lewis structure out fully for C, so we're looking at the condensed structure. But any particular carbon that has multiple hydrogens bonded to it is not chiral. So we can already mark off that carbon, that carbon, that carbon, that carbon, that carbon, and that carbon. None of those are chiral. So what about the two that I haven't marked off? This carbon right here, it's got a unique bond to hydrogen. It's got a unique bond to this methyl group. It's got, oh, another methyl group. So if I draw the Lewis structure off of this carbon looks like this. And then the rest of the molecule. I'm going to put an R for the rest of the molecule. That corresponds to all of this. So but because it has two identical methyl groups, that carbon is not chiral. So that leaves one carbon. What about this one? What about this carbon? Well, I need to erase because I'm getting too cluttered. This carbon right here is the one we're interested in. So I'm going to try to draw it out. See, it's got a hydrogen, it's got a CH3 group, then it has an ethyl group, and then it has a not an ethyl group, something totally different. CH2, CH, CH3, CH3. Okay. That is definitely a chiral carbon. Okay, 4 unique groups, so this is chiral. So this one is a chiral molecule, and so is 2-chloropentane. Okay, so a problem like this is a great example of what could be on the exam. I hope that helps, and if you have any questions on stereochemistry, let me know.